Hey everybody, how you going? How you doing? This is your boy, your man's Eglin's Best, homeless failed artist. Just coming at you with another, little talking video, little rant video. So essentially, lately, um, I've just been kind of, forming this whole definition of homelessness and everything like that, as far as what I refer to now as a capitalist prison without bars. And that's essentially what I'll, be, I guess, like, whenever I create books or something like that in the future, or videos or something like that, basically going into, that theory, that terminology, the proof, the whatever. But essentially what the basis of it is, after going through this for the last several years and coming to kind of a failure point here in Raleigh, um, which I'm hopefully going to remedy this week. Essentially, I just come to the conclusion and the definition of it being a capitalist prison without bars. As far as I'm concerned, there's no excuse for this country, um, with all its vast resources, wealth, money, everything, to be in this state of affairs right now where homelessness is literally just becoming a worse and worse epidemic by the day in America. Um, and I posted a stat recently, and bearing in mind the worldwide stat may be skewed, it may be more or less, but some of the people who are considered homeless in the world stat, um, maybe people who were just displaced by war, stuff like this, various other reasons. But regardless, the standing count last time I checked for worldwide homelessness is around 153, 160 something million people. And I know for some of you it would be like, well, that's out of 7 billion. um but that's just the ones we know about. For example, you know uh Gaston County, the place I've notoriously scrutinized Raleigh, because that's where my homeless journey began, and where basically every single aspect of it and their implementation of, for example, like criminalizing homelessness, criminalizing things like sleeping in a certain place at the wrong time and stuff like that, which is very, very a predominant method of the Gaston County local government. And that's the reason why you could go down to Gaston County to this day and still see every square inch of the city is covered in these signs that say no trespassing, police authorized to arrest under NC whatever their little Gaston County regulation is, which they passed a long time ago. Now, bearing in mind, Gaston County only had one homeless shelter, and that homeless shelter had a very limited capacity, the Salvation Army, which closed, for no reason or excuse or whatever. I know the one in Fayetteville closed as well. And as far as I'm concerned, Salvation Army is just shutting down, if not nationwide, at least in the state of North Carolina. They're pulling out of philanthropic resources and stuff like that, which is, I've said it before and I'll say it again, which is very funny to me from a corporation saying they don't have funding. And then on top of that, they've used this specifically. Salvation Army is notorious for this, but they've used this specifically as one of their linchpins in their corporate donation and push across America. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but over the years, Salvation Army has always touted the whole we help the homeless and we do this and we do that. And in several parts of the country, and I don't know exactly how the structure of Salvation Army works, but I do know that in the Salvation Army, from state to state, city to city, stuff like that, is vastly different programs. For example, I've heard that in Georgia, the Salvation Army there is a much more sophisticated, complex, and just, miles above, any other facility in the country. They have National Guard and stuff like that, recruiters or guidance and stuff like that on the grounds. They have a constant, mental health and help going through the system. They have a great facility that can house so many people. They have individual housing and stuff for those individuals inside the facility. Now, it's not the five-star whatever, but I mean, it's like, you get your room and, I think, have either your own room or you get a room with one other person and you both share that space and you have a door that can lock and you have your bunks and stuff like that. Meanwhile, in Gaston County, for example, and just like the homeless shelter up here, they had prison bunks, 2 people, 2 bunks, stuff like that, steel bunks with a mat on it. And that's basically what you get. And in Gaston County, you had the Salvation Army there. You had one tote that would fit all of your worldly possessions, your work outfits and everything like that. You didn't have a place to hang your clothes. You had a locker that was maybe, a foot by a foot to put any kind of items in. It had a lock, the ability to lock it, but you had to provide your own lock when you got in there. They didn't provide locks, a little master lock or just some little cheap lock or something like that they could provide for residents. They didn't do that. So when you first got in there, it's like, here's a locker, but you got to get your own lock. Well, thanks, guy. I don't have any money and I'm homeless. Well, that's not our problem. And then it was, seating, 2 people toward the bunks and stuff like that. They had black mold in the showers that could not be cleaned up on the ceiling and stuff. They had various, facility problems. They had bed bugs, you name it, inside there. And they sprayed 1,000 times for bed bugs, but they can never seem to get it right. And I don't know why. I don't know why this was the most complicated thing in history to get done. And actually, they timed it to where one day when we came into the facility, we actually had to wait because all the mats were still wet with pesticide whenever. And I mean, this is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Bearing in mind, we leave at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they had the entire day to do this spraying and, decontamination and whatever. And then it wasn't until we were let back in the facility, coincidentally, that we had to walk into mats all off of the bunks. They didn't put the mats back, and we had to put the mats back, and the mats were still wet with pesticide. And we were told it's okay, whatever. And as a matter of fact, one of the dumber residents who resided there or came in one night, he bought pesticide, brought it into the dorms, and sprayed his entire bunk. And the goddamn place smelled like pesticides. And it was like, at that point, I was just like, what the fuck ever, man. And, he was a guy who was like, he had an attitude like, fuck this place, fuck this world, but he had to come to the Salvation Army. And that's where a lot of homeless people kind of come into conflict with each other because, everybody's on a different page in homelessness. And for the most part, there was guys or people, generally speaking, who got into the Salvation Army who were trying to, at least in Gaston County, who were trying to get a job, trying to fix shit, trying to get things up. But it was like, with the rising housing costs, especially in COVID, my particular story of homelessness began during the pandemic. And my biggest setbacks and my biggest mental hurdles and things that really fucked me up along the way was the fact that I only had 1 month to get things sorted. I was fortunate enough to get a little, whatever job at Food Line there at the time. And then I was able to, secure that job, but then it was just like I was running out of options quick because it's like, nobody's renting right now. Nobody's renting because of the fucking moratorium on kicking people out, stuff like that. And this is when rent was still, pretty affordable. But nobody was leaving these apartments and stuff. So basically the homeless at that time were in furlough. But yet the Salvation Army was still running a program of fucking, you got 30 days and then you have to apply for an extension. And then once your time is up in that facility, you can't come back for another year if you're not banned, which can happen. They had chore lists, for example, that you had to do, which is not a problem. But the problem began when they wouldn't establish and they played games with that. So it's like at one time you could do the chores when you got back from work. For example, there was a period in time where I was there where I came back from work, or whatever one day, and they had changed the rules while everybody was at work. So then it was like, oh, well, now you have to do the chores in the morning. And they wrote me up for not doing my chore because the morning I left, it was still, you could do your chores when you get off of work in the afternoon. And then they changed it while I was gone and then wrote me up for that. And I'm like, look, you changed this shit while I was at work this morning when I left, and you couldn't argue with them. if you did argue with them, that's showing aggression, or if you tried to fight your case, that's showing aggression. So it was like, what the fuck ever, man. But no, homelessness is a capitalist prison. And that's just going to be my term and my theory and my future works and whatever I'm going to go toward in the future. Because to me, after seeing what I've seen and done what I've done and been through this and been through that and stuff like that, it's like, this is a prison. This is a prison without bars. And I've said this before, but I've never really specifically nailed it down to a capitalist prison. Which once again, I'm going to work on in the future. This is just something I've been kind of mulling over in my head over the last couple of weeks, just really getting fucking fed up with just all of the stories and everything like that. And I mean, one big thing that really fucked me up is just the fact that Gaston County had this article written about them, which was from a girl who interviewed me while I was homeless. Now, the Gaston Gazette, right before the Salvation Army closed and I was homeless, I met this man named Dwayne, who works through a Gateway Gastonia program in Gaston County. He had paid me, and I don't know if this is how they found me or whatever. He had paid me to write an article about homelessness before, and I did it. And I really didn't put my full 100% into it because, it was freezing cold. I was working a job at the time, and I was just, he offered payment, but in the same turn, it's like, man, I'm fucking struggling here, and it's very difficult to have time to sit down to write a full-page article and illustrate my thoughts and exactly everything I want to say in an article, which was then edited and passed on. I didn't read it. I didn't go over it. I really didn't go into it, but apparently that got on the radar with somebody because this girl, I won't mention her name here, but she is a writer for the Gaston Gazette. So she comes to me later or approaches me talking about who I guess she went through Dwayne. We're talking about doing this other article, but it was going to be different this time. She was going to interview me. And I was like, okay. So we set up a thing or whatever. She interviewed me, got the article, but didn't offer any kind of payment. And, I'll be fair to the girl. I mean, she was just doing her fucking job. And I understand that. But in the same turn, she came to me, and it wasn't a person who was passionate about it. This was another gig to her. This was her career. So anyways, going back to the article that she wrote about this other shit about homelessness. It was this guy who was a reverend or a pastor or something. And I haven't been, and this has been since I've left Gastonia. So this article was written at the beginning of the year. But basically it was in the article, it went to describe that there's this, all of a sudden, this mobilization of these people trying to do whatever and blah, 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 blah. Now, coincidentally, at this time, Gastonia has a $2.5 million grant that is in their hands right now, $2.5 fucking million to build not two, but one homeless facility in Gaston County. Now, I've discussed this with people who have helped me. Danielle Webb, which is the only person I really truly has earned, my respect and trust through the organizations in Gaston County. Her organization, Displaced Roses, is the only place that is doing anything inside that county worth viable note. And it starts with her treating people as human beings and not as a stigma, which you could tell comes with, no offense to anyone, but that comes with every single person who comes through the helping homeless people gig. And I'm going to be honest with you, 99.9% of the time, that is a Christian founded thing, and it comes with Christian stigma. Every one of us is junkies, or every one of us is insane, or every one of us is, the devil incarnate, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just not the case. And I have been through this for so long and met various people. And then, bearing in mind, and I want to throw this out there that, let's go back to the article. I'm sorry. I got a little sidetracked, but the article, once again, was talking about all these people coming together and fucking doing this mobilization, blah, 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 blah. And I was just looking at this and I'm like, this is goddamn stupid. This is ridiculous. And I'm like, it took you this long. Homelessness in Gaston County has been degrading and going into a shit situation for the last 30 years, at least. Because you could talk to people who were around when the first Salvation Army was open, And it was a whole different facility and a whole better program. And I talked to some of the old heads who were doing it at the time, and they said, man, back in the day, it was just like they had this open buffet. You could go in there, eat as much as you want, leave. It actually sounded like a better facility before they closed it down and built this new facility. And when they built the new facility, it was more of a prison. It was more of, like, literally, to understand, when you left in the morning or whenever you would leave to go outside to smoke a cigarette or just step outside or to walk to the grocery store or whatever around the corner, the Quick Trip or, the fucking Dollar General around the corner to buy something, you had to go through a locked door, 2 locked doors, or 1 locked door, and you had to be buzzed in by the person. So basically, you could not enter the facility without going there, ringing the doorbell, and then if there was somebody at the front desk, which, trust me, there was more times than not where that person at that front desk, which should have been their only responsibility and job, was gone. And so basically, if you got back and that person wasn't there, you had to wait until that person came back, whether that was 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Sometimes people waited out there 30 minutes for them to come back to let them back into the damn facility. And it wasn't just like they popped in and out. It was, and there'd be families there. There'd be women with their kids and stuff like that. And they'd have their babies out there and it'd be freezing. Sometimes it would be winter and they would have to go outside to meet someone to get something for their kids or something like that. And then they would come back to the door and that person would conveniently just walk the fuck away. And I mean, it was just mental shit like that. But not only that, you got to understand about homelessness is that, once you're in this and you're in this environment and stuff like that, you meet some really good fucking people. You meet some really substantial people. And, you're basically sitting there, and if that person, they're not all perfect people. No, nobody is. And you meet these people who are good people, but they got a demon or monkey on their back. They got drug addiction or something like that, or just mental issues that are exacerbated by drug addiction. And then they die. I mean, they literally die. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I've known more than my handful of people who have died on these streets and through this and stuff like that. And that's a big mental toll. You're going through, like, say, for example, you're in a shelter. You get to know the guys in there. You're really packed in like sardines, like in prison. And you get to know these people. And then if somebody, gets fucked over by the system, like they get violated or they get, they get points, like they point out and then they kicked them out of the facility and this person was actually doing good or well, it's like you got to sit there and watch them leave. And it's like, that this person is like, and sometimes it happens with the person doesn't do anything wrong or whatever, but it's like they run out of time. And once again, they would only give you 3 months tops. You had to fight for those 3 months while you were working to get fucking your life together, to basically find an apartment, get up enough money for a deposit and stuff like that. And then over the years, with the rental costs and everything going out of fucking control, it's like, man, like, how the fuck are you supposed to do this? Like, you get in there immediately and you realize it's like, man, like, there is no way to do this. There is no feasible way to get this done within 4 months. And you might get lucky to find somebody to get a roommate situation, stuff like that, but then you have to put a lot of trust in there, because trust me, there is a ton of predators who prey on homeless people, homosexual predators, heterosexual predators, everything. Work predators who are looking for slaves, basically, or people to work for an entire day, breaking their back to pay them $10 or something like that. I mean, it's constant. It's constant, and it's, some guy who comes and offers you something and is like, oh, I'm going to bring you whatever, and it's grooming. It's like, if you ever learned about like sexual predators or pedophiles, it's the same thing they do with kids. They start to groom them. And they use these tactics where they're like, oh, well, I'll give you this or I'll give you that. And it's like they're softening the pot. And there's no mention of any kind of intercourse at first or any kind of sexual favor. And then later on, they just pop that question. And a lot of times it turns into, they're feeling you out to see how you act or whatever. And recently I have questions about a man who I met through a Nextdoor app who was saying that he needed something done with his father. he met me that night and gave me some stuff, but and, nothing happened. But then he there's a couple weird things that happened. He said, "Okay, my dad." He's like, "I gotta tell you, my dad's a homosexual." I'm like, "Well, that doesn't matter to me, man. Like, I don't care." And then he was talking about his dad had to get this done before the first of the month, and I'm like, "All right." And then one of the things he brought up toward the end of the conversation that was really fucking weird was like, do you do drugs? And I'm like, no, I don't do drugs, because I smelled weed as soon as I entered the car. And he's like, well, you're fired or whatever. I'm like, and I thought it was a joke. I'm like, oh, okay, well, whatever. I'm like, well, I don't hold nothing against people who do stuff, but I'm like, why would that apply to anything that we're discussing, though? It's like you're sitting here talking to me about going to get paid per day to help your father get his shit straight so he can do the inspection, the home inspection that's coming up by the first. And this is a couple of days before the first. This is maybe 4 or 5 days, 6 days before the first. So we were supposed to meet a day later or so, about on the Friday. He was supposed to send some guy to pick me up, whatever, and he would be in touch. And I'm like, okay, cool. He'd pick me up in the morning. We'd go to his father's house. We'd get this shit done in maybe 2 days. He never discussed payment with me, which was another red flag. He never said what his father would pay me. But he was like, oh, my dad's a generous person, whatever. And I was like, going to take it on faith. I was like, fuck it, man. I need the money. I need to get something established. So, maybe 2 days, I might get lucky, get about $100 for 2 days worth of work, busting my ass, hopefully. And all of a sudden, the morning of, or the day before, he said that the guy who was supposed to pick me up got sick. And then he was like, oh, well, if you could find something for these next 2 days, a paid opportunity, then take it. And I knew then, I was like, okay, well, something. Actually, I knew the night he was sitting there talking about, do you do drugs? And I said, no, that it was, something went wrong there. Something went wrong in the communication. Now, he was a very kind man, and he hooked me up with a blanket, pillow. He made me a couple sandwiches. He had some sodas in there. Actually, kind of way too much for me to carry around and use. So whatever I could not use and utilize, I threw away. And then, of course, going into, that very next day, I left my blanket and my pillow in a place where city crews come and throw away shit. They threw it away. So I lost that instantly, which has been a constant problem. And I get it, but then again, I don't. And here, just like in Gaston County, they've basically cordoned off. For example, there's a place here where you could go and there's gates. Like, there's a company that's paying every day to run gates around an abandoned lot that is at least 5-6 acres of property to keep anybody from camping or sleeping there or anything. And it's like those construction gates you see, and it's around like at least 6 acres, 10 acres of land. I mean, this field and this place is fucking huge, but yet they've cordoned it off to keep anybody from sleeping there, camping there, anything. And it's just abandoned property that's not being used. The woods, everything like that have not been fixed. And it's basically a huge area that has just been isolated. And I get and I understand the arguments. Of course, that's the way it is with the oppression of any people, or the rights being stripped or whatever of any people. Is there's always the worst examples put forward. And that's their justification for cruelty and other people's cruelty toward homeless people, not helping, not assisting, stuff like that. I've said it before. I talked about an elderly black woman who was in Gaston County that I sit there and watch sleep on a street corner every fucking day. And I would see dope boys and big pimps and all this shit driving by in Cadillacs and Escalades with $80,000 cars. And this woman would be just sitting there dying. They're elder. And nobody would get the fuck out to help. Nobody would get the fuck out and do nothing, stuff like that. She'd sit there for days and freezing to death, dying, and nobody would come fucking utilize or do anything. An old, frail, elderly, 110-pound soaking wet black woman. Just leaving her to die. And that's the way it happens here. This is the way it happens everywhere. And I mean, I understand and I get with certain people, you ain't going to help them. Okay, I get that. But then there's no excuse, particularly for the elderly and disabled, which they see and they acknowledge and they walk past it every day. And it's like, blah, 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 blah. Nothing happens. But in the same term, There's people in this country who could have cured it a long time ago, done something about it a long time ago. And I'm not going to put all the exclusive weight on billionaires and stuff like that. And I mean, but they could have done something. I mean, the government could have fixed this shit years ago. They could have had whole new approaches and utilized it. I mean, you got to think after the first 10 years of this, why did they not come together and have massive meetings like, look, man, we got a problem? That's because it's engineered and it's meant to be this way. And not only does this serve, and I've said this before, but I'll go ahead and elaborate on the capitalist prison without bars. It serves a dual purpose. I mean, not only do they, because you got to ask, why are there some things happening in cities? And I've said this before, but I'll state it again. Why is it, people are allowed to lose their mind on the goddamn streets right in front of you as you walk to work and do this and do that, but yet they get arrested if they sleep in the wrong place at the wrong time? So, I mean, you got to start questioning this shit in a deeper perspective, man, because this is going out of control even more and more daily. It's not yearly now. It's not in a couple years. And going back to Gaston County, during that article, it was talking about their homeless population has doubled. Well, that's because their census on those homeless people was never accurate to begin with. And one day you could go, and I mean, people don't understand how much can happen in a day in a city or a week. You could start out the beginning of the week and say, okay, there's 100 homeless people, okay? And that's just the ones you find. And I know that the census takers and shit like that, in my years of homelessness and stuff like that, I never heard of them or seen them, and wherever they were, they stayed in one spot and expected all the homeless people just to be there. I know, for example, they would not go into campsites. They're terrified of campsites, but yet they're getting paid. And some of these positions are paid government positions, mind you. These people are getting paid at least $40,000 a year, a good government job and benefits and all this, to basically not accomplish what they're set there to do. Which once again leads me to wonder what the hell exactly is going on here. I was talking to a friend earlier of mine, and we were discussing, a very dear friend of mine, Opal, and I was discussing with her. I was like, we were talking about the homeless thing and et cetera, and certain aspects of it. And I was telling her, I'm like, unfortunately for me, I will probably never be housed again for the rest of my life for a couple of reasons. Second of all, first of all, I don't know if I'll ever be able to accumulate that much wealth. And that's first of all. I'm sorry. Second of all, I don't know if I ever want to go back into a system of paying greedy landlords quadruple, 4 times what the fuck a place is worth. And you have just this going on exponentially. Like I said, this exponential growth of rent that is not justified or not really put out there. And then, so the homeless, and I mentioned this before, but the homeless industrial complex feeds the capitalist homeless prison. And going back to what you see on the streets, that shit serves a purpose, man. That shit's to keep you turning the fucking gears. That shit's to keep you afraid. That shit's to keep you fucking dealing with the fucking bullshit wages. That shit's kept there to keep you paying the high rent costs and everything like that, or elsewise you're going to be cast down with the rest of us. And it's almost like, the reason why American federal institutions are allowed to be so goddamn lax and so much crime happens inside of them, because they know that that's a nuclear deterrent in their mind. Because if they make it so god awful bad, and the threat of violence and sexual assault and so much is so bad inside these prisons, then that's supposedly going to keep you from doing it, so they can do whatever the fuck they want to you, right? It serves their narrative. Okay, going into that, and I'm going to wrap up this video. Somebody you really need to check out is Ali Sadiq. He's a great comedian, great performer, and his story is amazing. It's called The Domino Effect. You need to check out all 4 parts of it. I've never seen anything like it, and I've never heard of anything like it, but it is an amazing journey through his entire life and everything, and he emboldened me to do this and to basically keep pushing through the storm. So anyways, I'm going to leave it at that. You guys have a great day. Take care of yourselves. I love you very much. If you could support, please look below financially or whatever you can do to help. I'd really appreciate it right now. Thank you so much. Take care and have a good day.